So, hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's the first Sunday in month, and it's time for our EDBTA webinar. Happy that you are here, or if you look at it later, happy that you joined in at the YouTube channel. So, it's my pleasure to introduce Christian Schmahl from Heidelberg University, Central Institute of Mental Health, Mannheim. He is holding the chair of psychometric medicine and psychotherapy since 2022, and actually he is my successor. So I'm in the extremely happy position that I have the successor of my choice since Christian and I worked for about 30 years together. And actually, it's a lot of insight we gained in the last 30 years on mechanisms of borderline personality disorder stems from Christian's lab. So the background is that Marsha Linehan, as you might know, she developed DBT, and her scientific source was N is 1. This means she studied borderline patients in investigating herself. So, and actually she suffered from some kind of borderline disorder at a very age of 18, 19, 20. And maybe you know all the stories that she really suffered a lot. She was in inpatient treatment. Nobody really could cure her. And then she made a vote and said, okay, I have to get out. I have to find my way out. I have to develop a treatment. And if I develop a treatment for myself, then I will come back and treat anybody else. So when I met her, the basis was that it was just assumptions. Marsha thought and hypothesized that borderline personality disorder is a problem or a major problem of emotion dysregulation, since she studied herself and figured out that her emotions were dysregulated. So, and then I came to Seattle and we got very close friends, and the whole talks, what we did was more or less saying, Marsha, you're fine with your assumptions, but we have to figure out whether it's really evident that borderline patients suffer in general. Not only you, but borderline patients per se suffer from problems with emotion dysregulation and others. So when I get back, talking with Christian, I said, okay, Christian, we have to figure out and to test whether Marsha's assumptions about herself are true for any other borderline patients. This is when we started. And we started with basic research on emotion regulation. And Christian was the very first person who picked up the idea of why do people cut themselves, and studied and figured out that if patients cut themselves, they are analgesic or hypergenic, they don't experience pain. And this is when he started neurofunctional investigations with patients with borderline. And together we had a journey of 30 years. And our common basic was always, let's get as close as the clinic as possible. This means always combining treatment as a treating patients and treatment development and clinical research based on investigations on patients, what we treated. And so Christian is brilliant in organizing big teams, and also he's brilliant in organizing huge cohorts of clients. And when we went from Freiburg to Mannheim, where I got the chair, I was very happy that Christian joined me, and he became the director of the research department. And the whole idea was always that we invited patients coming to Mannheim every week. We had always two patients every week, and then we invited them. They paid the hotel, and then they stayed there for a week, and running one investigation after the other. And I think I stopped immediately. So I think in the best times, well, the best times is yours, not. But in my best times, we had about 40 researchers working on studying borderline, and together more or less. And also I would say Uli Ebner Prima and Nico Kleindienst and a lot of others, Steffi Liss, Inga Niedfeld, just to say a few of them. We covered the whole field, starting from, let's say, animal research, genetics, molecular genetics, then neurophysiology, neuropsychology, neuroimaging, treatment development, treatment utilization, and treatment research. So that was the idea, and it always worked. And now I'm so happy, Christian, that you took your time and give us a lecture on cutting edge on the neurobiology of BPD. And you had said you want to open the scope a little bit in general personality disorders. So the stage is your, Christian. I'm listening.
Thank you. Hello. Can you hear me well? Okay. Very well. So welcome everybody listening to us today. And thank you, Martin, very much for this very kind introduction and high expectations now on me. So as Martin already mentioned, we have a long journey together and I liked every minute of it. And I want to talk a little bit tonight about what is that all about, this neurobiological research? Why do we do that? And I think it is interesting per se, but the most important thing is, as Martin just mentioned, to better understand mechanisms and to better understand how treatment works and how we can possibly improve treatments as well. And that's what I want to show you in the next 15 minutes. The other thing I want to talk about, and that is also already mentioned, is that if you increase the numbers from n of 1 to hundreds and thousands of participants of your study, the broader the spectrum gets and the more difficult it gets to narrow it down to one particular disorder. And so I want also to take a little bit of time to show you how on the latest developments on not only borderline personality disorder, which is of course still the most studied and the most important one, and of course the most research is there, but in recent years also the dimensional view on personality disorders has helped us to understand mechanisms better, and I want to show you that in a minute. So let's start with the new classification. As you probably know, ICD 11, DSM-5 has new personality disorder classifications. Why is that the case? Why do we need that? As you know, patient groups are very heterogeneous and no one patient is like the other. So there is the need for a dimensional view. Also, there is excessive comorbidity. On average, each patient with BPD fulfills two other disorders. There is, at least if you look worldwide, the highest prevalence of personality disorder is PD not otherwise specified, not BPD. There is a stigmatization of diagnosis, maybe not so much in BPD anymore, but other PDs have been stigmatized a lot. And in all psychiatry and psychotherapy, there is a trend for individualized and more individualized, personalized treatment. And here's the most important point is that I believe that the new classification and the new dimensional system is better suited to conceptualize the underlying neurobiology of these mechanisms and helps us developing treatment. So there are also some clinical advantages of the dimensional versus the categorical classification. Here are just a few examples. They are, if you have a dimensional approach, you receive a better prediction for decision making as compared to categorical diagnosis. If you for the choice of psychotherapy and pharmacotherapy, therapy intensity, and also for the long-time prognosis, not only of personality disorders, but the same holds true for other psychiatric conditions nowadays. Just an example here, the correlation of suicidal ideation and the attempt of the likelihood that a given person really does a suicide attempt is moderated by disinhibition, which is a personality trait. So high disinhibition leads to a positive correlation between suicidal ideation and the likelihood that the person really does it, whereas with low disinhibition, the opposite is the case. So high disinhibition predicts inter-individual coupling between suicide thoughts and attempts. That is just one example. How is the ICD-11 diagnostic process for PD? You probably know that in some of your countries, probably ICD-11 is already in place also for clinical purposes. In Germany, it's not yet the case. So as always, as it was in ICD-10, as it in the DSM, you always had to assess the general criteria for personality disorders. For example, they have to have a duration for at least 2 years. They must comprise not only emotions, but also cognitions and behavior, and all ways of life, family, occupation, and social. That was always the case, so that has not changed. Now, what is new is that there is a severity level, very simple, low, medium, severe. And now we come to the dominant maladaptive personality patterns. There are these 5 personality patterns: negative affectivity, dissociality, disinhibition, anancastia, and detachment. Negative affectivity is, broadly speaking, what we also call emotion dysregulation. And I think it's very good that the borderline pattern is still um, there and is still valid. So that's the good old 9 criteria that comprise the borderline pattern. So this can still be diagnosed in ICD-11. So I don't think that we lose anything with a new dimensional view, but we gain a broader view and we keep the good things such as the borderline pattern. So that's my opinion. The functional level impairment is very easy to assess. So we have, that was also already the case, always personality disorders comprise disturbance of the self and the relation to others, so the interpersonal relationship. And then these 2 areas have 3 domains allocated. So for self, it's the identity, very important in borderline personality disorder, and also self-regulation and self-esteem. In the area others, interpersonal area, it's empathy, closeness, and intimacy, and conflicts. As you see, this is now, of course, all domains are also disturbed in BPD. And then again, the 3 severity levels, and there's below the threshold, the personality problems here. Okay, so now these dimensions here spread out between more self-related functions, such as in psychoticism through anancastia, negative affectivity, and disinhibition, which comprise self and interpersonal functional impairments, up to antagonism, dissociality, which is differently called in ICD-11 and DSM-5, and detachment. So these are the 6 ICD-11 DSM-5 dimensions. Very easy, the personality patterns, and they also nicely match on the RDoC framework of the NIMH research domain criteria, and also the HiTOP framework, the hierarchical taxonomy of psychopathology. So they can all be embedded in these frameworks. So this is a little bit the background. Now let's move a little bit back to what we know about mostly negative affectivity and borderline personality disorder. So the first question, as always, is, and people always ask, yeah, well, BPD, is that acquired, or is it because of traumatic life events, or is it genetically based, or both? Of course, as all it's in psychology, it's both. So it's not nature or nurture, of course. But let's look at these 2 factors separately. So first at the heritability and the genetics. First, it's interesting to see that there is a high heritability of these personality dimensions that we just talked about. So as you see here, antagonism, detachment, disinhibition, negativity, and psychoticism, you see here these A squares are the variance explained by heritability. So it's between 40 and 50% of these personality dimensions are explained by your genes. Interestingly, when you look at individual genes, you see these famous Manhattan plots, meaning that there are certain genes that peak up here that have a high probability that they explain some kind of the variance in the disorder. And here in this kind for neuroticism, extraversion, and the big five or personality dimensions. So there are a few peaks here, and then certain genes show up. You mostly people don't know what these genes are standing for. So that's the fun side of genetics. But a little bit more interesting is when you look at gene expression, so you're a little bit nearer to the actual mechanisms in the brain, for example. Here in this interesting post-mortem brain tissue study, you can see which of the genes are expressed in which brain regions. And interesting, most for neuroticism and extraversion. And when you look at the brain regions, now we come to regions that are interesting for us, such as the amygdala, our brain emotion center, or the hippocampus, our memory center, or the hypothalamus, which is important for endocrinological function. And interestingly, there are a lot of genes expressed that are related to these traits in these brain regions. So there is some link between genetics and brain function here. Recently, a very big so-called gene-wide association study, GWAS, where Martin and I were also part of with our samples from Mannheim, is in the process of being published. And as you see here, that's a big study. So it's now more than 12,000 cases of BPD. Now we are at borderline personality disorder that also showing 9 genes where people have to find out what they actually mean. But interestingly, what I find more interesting again here is when you look at covariation of these genes that are involved in borderline personality disorder, they are very closely linked to factors of trauma, such as you see here. Interestingly, mostly emotional abuse, emotional neglect, highly correlated here with the genes that are important for BPD. So nearly all trauma factors are related on a genetic level with BPD, but also, and that's why I said genetic heritability of BPD is also dimensional, a lot of overlap with other psychiatric conditions, most prominently PTSD, followed by depression and ADHD, which is interestingly and clinically not at all surprising that there is a high level of clinical overlap and also a lot of genetic variability overlap between these conditions. And finally, coming back to my favorite, the personality traits, a lot of overlap, very high correlation with behavioral patterns, personality patterns, most prominently antisocial behavior, loneliness. I think Martin will like that, externalizing and neuroticism. So that's the interesting part of this genetic heritability, again, this overlap. Now, people always ask, yeah, well, genetic explains a lot, but what about trauma? Now, when we look at the influence of traumatic life events and these personality dimensions, then we see that interestingly, these two at the extremes, so detachment and psychoticism, has the highest influence of traumatic life events on these deep dimensions. So psychoticism and detachment are the most have the most explanation to traumatic events. And when we look at the influence of here these factors as measured by the childhood trauma questionnaires, abuse and neglect, um, then we see that several personality disorders have a strong effects by childhood trauma. As you see here, BPD is of course one of it, but not the only one. The others are paranoid. So we are now back at the classical DSM-4 ICD-10 personality disorders, I have to say. Paranoid personality disorder, borderline PD, avoidant PD dependent, and also obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And this nicely mirrors the comorbidity of these personality disorders with PTSD. If you look at this study, it's a bit full here, and the red line is around PTSD. So you see, again, paranoid, borderline, avoidant, and OCPD have the highest comorbidity with post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, so that was the influence of traumatic life events and genetics. Now we back to our mostly studied and the prominent negative affectivity, emotion dysregulation. As Martin um, very rightly mentioned, this is the starting point and still the stronghold of neurobiological research in BPD and also beyond in other trauma and stress related disorders. Um, so as our groups, Uli Ebner-Prima, for example, and others measured emotional instability by smartphones, now called ecological momentary assessment, which is really a mainstream in research in psychiatry nowadays. And here this study, which is already 10 years old by Philip Santangelo, who nicely demonstrated that when you measure mood from hour to hour, from very bad to very good mood, here green to red, you see healthy controls are mostly green, so they feel good most of the time, whereas a group of patients with borderline personality disorder show a very colorful pattern. So you see different colors and you see changes from hour to hour, which is the famous emotional instability. This is one of the key facts in BPD research, and the group also could nicely show that this is related to age. That here the borderline group is the black line, and the blue line is a healthy control group. At age 20, there's a huge difference in the instability of arousal and valence. But this difference becomes smaller and smaller, and around 45 to 50, there is no difference anymore. So emotional instability goes down with age in BPD. Another interesting findings from the group there is that it is not only emotional instability, but even more so, instability of self-esteem. They compared a group of borderline personality patients, the black bars, a group of anxiety disorders, and a healthy control group. You see only small differences in emotional instability between BPD and anxiety disorder. So it is not really specific for BPD, but is found in other psychiatric conditions as well. But same study showed that there is a large difference in self-esteem instability between BPD and anxiety disorders. You see the black bars have much more difference from hour to hour in self-esteem, even as compared to anxiety disorder. So self-esteem seems to be even closer related to borderline personality disorder than emotional instability. Now we move to the brain, and I've done neuroimaging research now for a couple of time, and always in the center of attention is always the amygdala, the red dot here. And interestingly, there are brain networks involved in cell functioning. So for this part of this spectrum, and there are brain networks involved in interpersonal function. So you can roughly say that brain networks in cell functioning are at the mid side of the brain, whereas interpersonal function is more widely distributed, also more lateral at the lateral part of the brain. But both networks comprise and have in the center the amygdala. The amygdala is our emotion center of the brain. And we studied the amygdala back and forth. And for example, when looking at pictures like that, very negative pictures, the amygdala lights up. And this is not only found by us, but many found that. And we, in a meta-analysis, we could demonstrate that the amygdala is higher in activity when emotion are activated by pictures like that, or IAPS pictures showing negative content. So this is a well-known fact, not also not specific for BPD. PTSD patients show the same pattern. But now, Martin already spoiled that a little bit. We looked at what is related to self-injury. Why is that working at all? And first, we did another meta-analysis showing that there are certain other brain regions involved in emotion regulation. So mostly frontal. Here you see the front part of the brain. They show up when you regulate your emotions while you lie in the scanner. So this is the motion regulation circuit, simply sketched here. So you have an overactivity of the amygdala, which is overactive in BPD, and you have not enough activity in these prefrontal and mid-frontal control regions. So it's a missing of the break of emotions, which leads to an overshooting of the amygdala and probably related to a lot of known behavioral patterns we see in BPD and also related to self-injury. So we ask ourselves, what is wrong with the brain during the self-injury? And we studied that, as Martin mentioned, with pain stimuli. Borderline patients have a reduced pain sensitivity, and when we apply pain in the scanner, like with this heat pain here at the hand, we see the opposite of the last slide. We see a decrease of the amygdala. So this leads others than in healthies and also other than in patients with other disorders. In BPD, it leads to a dampening of the amygdala activity. So that was the first hint that something is wrong during self-injury in the brain, and that this might lead to a regulation of an overshoot of the amygdala. We did a lot of studies there. For example, we did combine that with a little incision in the skin. So we did a little pain induction with a scalpel, where we do an incision penetrating the skin. So combining pain with tissue damage. And again, we see a dampening of the amygdala. You see the red bar goes down while the incision takes place, and in healthy, it goes up. And also, what is even more important, that the connectivity between these regions, the connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, which is important for emotion regulation, is only activated in borderline patients during the incision, not during the sham treatment where we touch the skin with the back of the scalpel. So this we found quite interesting, and we've understood a little bit better why maybe patients often hurt themselves, cut themselves. So we had a lot of other questions we tackled in our clinical research unit, where Martin and I were chairs of. For example, we ask ourselves, well, is it the pain of self-injury, or is it the injury? So is it important that the skin is damaged, like in cutting or burning the skin, or is pain enough? So what we did here is, first we stress patients here in the red shaded area. So we increase stress levels through a stress induction in the scanner. And then we had different conditions. We did the incision, where we did a little cutting in the arm, and we had a control condition with a what we called blade stimulus. It's also painful. It has the same painfulness as the scalpel, but the only difference is that the blade doesn't penetrate the skin. So the pain is the same, but interestingly, there was no difference. So it didn't matter whether the skin is penetrated, which surprised us a bit. It is indeed the pain that makes for the reduction of the stress levels here. Another aspect what we investigated, well, does it make a difference when you see blood? That's what, of course, you know that a lot of patients report. I felt better when the blood was flowing across my arm. And we mimicked that in the lab with the scalpel that was combined with this artificial blood, which is similar to real blood in texture and temperature and color. Very similar. This is, for example, used in movies or in theaters. And here, there was indeed a difference. You look at this left side here, the BPD group, there is a stronger decrease of stress levels when we combine the plate with the blood. So indeed, red color at the skin makes an additional difference. And the last question is, of course, does it make a difference whether the injury is self-injury or other injury? So we tested that again by a stress induction. Stress goes up when we stress them in the scanner. Then we did this plate stimulus by the patients themselves. They put that on their arm, or someone else put it on their arm. And here, again, to our surprise, there was no difference in the decrease of the arousal rating. So we thought that self-injury, self-pain afflicting has a stronger stress level reduction, but that was not the case. So no difference between self and other inflicted pain. So to sum it up, so the important ingredient seems to be pain, whether applied by yourself or someone else. Blood has an additional effect, and this is that's just the beginning of a longer research journey, and there are still some open questions. For example, is it always that prototypical mechanism, stress increase, then patient helps, and after that the stress goes down? That's what we often see clinically. But when we looked at a larger cohort of not only BPD patients, but subjects with high frequency of self-injuries, we saw a very colorful picture. So we clustered these 60 participants, and we saw 7 different clusters. So, for example, there is the classical here, number 2, stress increase and decrease afterwards. There are also very different pictures. Look at cluster 6, for example. So you have after the self-injury, the red dotted line is always the self-injury, and these are the 7 clusters. So for this cluster of patients show an increase after self-injury. Others show a first decrease and then another increase. So we still don't fully understand that. We try to disentangle a bit who are these people, or what are the situations they cut. But it's very interesting to see that it's very heterogeneous, the cause of tension and stress levels before and after self-injury. Last thing here, what we investigated is the role of opioids, endorphins. We saw that beta endorphins as the main pain modulator and also an emotion modulator shows an increase after self-injury back to normal levels. So self-injury tested in everyday life here, and endorphins also with the salivats in the real life of the patients showed an increase back to normal levels. So self-injury is somehow used to normalize better endorphin levels. All right, so now let's move and take this knowledge and go to psychotherapy. And as Martin mentioned, we always had the great opportunity in Mannheim to combine high-level clinical work with also very good research. And we could use these DBT programs that Martin installed in Mannheim and test emotion regulation before and after that. So we have this 12 weeks inpatient residential DBT program. And what we did is now these paradigms that you already now know, reappraisal paradigms, so viewing or new reappraisal of these pictures or pain stimulation before and after DBT. And we had a control group that was just tested 12 weeks apart. And we found a few interesting things. For example, that responders, here that's the left side, those that responded to DBT treatments, showed an improvement in the borderline symptoms, also had a very steep decrease in the amygdala activity during reappraisal, while the non-responders showed no difference. The red bars here, you see no change here in the red bars, but a strong decrease in the amygdala activity of the DBT responders. And also very interesting is that the recording stopped. It was just said. I hope that can be solved. Should I wait? No. Okay. So that the pattern of amygdala decrease that we all saw already in the last slides can be changed back to normal levels. So after DBT, the amygdala shows the normal increase of pain stimulation, which is seen in healthies, which is, I think, very nice. So that 12 weeks DBT can really shift that pattern back to a normalization of amygdala activity here. Also interesting is that the emotion control region, the prefrontal cortex, shows an increase of volume here. The yellow area is larger after DBT as compared to a treatment as usual group. So psychotherapy leads to an increase of this emotion control region in the brain. And last part of this story here is to use these neuroimaging data to predict the success of psychotherapy, which we did in the pilot study here. We tested whether clinical data, classical questionnaire data, predict psychotherapy. They did it quite okay. So the accuracy levels are okay, 70% accuracy, but the best predictors were our fMRI and structural MRI data. So the volume of the hippocampus and the activation of the amygdala explained better who responds to treatment, which is actually not so surprising because you see that in many psychiatric conditions, addiction disorders, schizophrenia, and so on, that often brain imaging data predict better psychotherapy success than symptom lists. And this was a pilot study. We have now a larger project funded by the German Research Foundation to hopefully replicate that or find new predictors, not only neuroimaging, but also other neurobiological and psychological predictors of psychotherapy. All right, so that was the big bulk of classical emotion dysregulation research. Now we move again a little bit to other personality patterns. Only just highlighting a few research options. I can't go into so much detail here because, of course, my main focus is on BPD today. But I just wanted to show you how modern neuroimaging and modern mechanistic research can be used to better understand these personality patterns. Let's go to antagonism or dissociality, which is underlying a lot of behavioral problems related to aggression. Aggression is a very prominent problem, not only in BPD, but also, of course, other mental health conditions across the board in psychiatry. Aggression, self-related aggression, as in BPD, self-injurious behavior, but also, of course, towards other people. We test that now in a larger consortial project at different places in Germany. We are part of 20 individual projects there. We do projects on aggression do that in the neuroimaging environment. What we do is we do MR spectroscopy. We look at glutamate and GABA levels, the most important excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters, how they are related to aggression, and we induce aggression with a provocation paradigm. You are told that you play with another player, and that you can then take accept the offers or decline the offers of the other players. So the other player can, for example, say he will get 18 and you get €4, which is quite unfair, right? But the problem is when you don't accept the offer, you get nothing. You only get something when you accept the offer, how unfair it is. And then we combine that with really nasty comments such as, come on, loser, take this offer, that's the last chance, and so on and so on. So you are driven into aggression there. As I said, when you reject it, you don't get anything and your opponent also gets nothing. So that's a kind of a revenge. But you will notice during the game that even unfair offers should be accepted, then you can earn money. And this um, increases your aggression levels, and then we test aggression in the MR spectroscopy before and after that, and look at the changes of, for example, glutamate and GABA levels, and also other fMRI paradigms. And in a similar vein, the group from Sabine Herpertz, also a spin-off from our clinical research unit, has developed a mechanism-based group psychotherapy approach that is also tested in this larger consortial project, a group psychotherapy approach for aggressive behavior in BPD. And yes, let's move on. Detachment. So that's really a key domain of interpersonal dysfunction. And this is, as you probably know, social interaction in BPD is a very important topic. How can you measure that? You can measure that in the MR environment by something called hyperscanning, where two people lie in two different scanners. We did that also in Mannheim. So here you see two scanners on the left side. People are lying there and they start to interact with each other in a very simple paradigm. So they follow their eye gaze. So one person looks to the right, the other is told, please look in the same direction. A very simple social interaction, just follow the eyes of the others. And we did that in different dyadic interactions. So, for example, borderline patients with blade was in one scanner, the healthy participant was in the others. And what then lights up is a region called the temporoparietal junction, TPJ, which is important for this social connection between these two players. We found some interesting things here, dependent on who did that with whom. When we looked at the neural coupling, so the higher here the value on the y-axis, the better the neural coupling, the brighter this region is. We saw when two healthy controls play with each other, the coupling is very high. When here, this one, when a patient with current borderline personality disorder with a was in one scanner and the healthy participant in the other, unfortunately, the coupling in that region was lower. But the good message here is that when a patient was remitted, so when they have stopped cutting themselves for 2 years, we call them remitted BPD patients, and they are, as you can see here, when they play with the healthy participants, there is no difference anymore to when two healthies play with each other. That means a remission of BPD leads to a normalization of functional coupling in a very simple social interaction paradigm in the scanner. Another way to test interaction and also trust and trustworthiness in dyadic interactions is the so-called thin slices paradigm. That is a paradigm where participants watch a short video sequence of 30 seconds, a very short video. That's why it's called thin slice of a behavior. You see a short video of a target person without seeing much more. You don't know much about this person. And we did that with videos of borderline personality disorder participants and also non-borderline personality disorder participants. So they were filmed while they talked about very simple things about what they like, which food they like most, where they had their last holiday, very basic things. And also they did a cooperation game, and they also did a so-called dictator game. So these healthies and the borderline patients um, were allowed to take out money from an envelope that was given to them by a so-called dictator. So an unknown person gives you €5 and you can take out um, as much as you want. So this is a very basic social interaction dictator game. Interestingly, there was no difference in the actual money that the borderline patients took out. They, in average, took out a little bit less than €3, as you can see here, from these €5. So similar actual behavior. So there was no difference in the actual money that was shared of these patients that were filmed. So we had borderline patients filmed and healthy control. And then comes the rating. Now, healthy students from Mannheim University rated these videos in terms of trustworthiness. How are these persons with BPD judged as compared to healthy controls? And now, unfortunately, they were asked, yeah, well, this person in the video, how much money did they really share and how much did they take? And there was a difference. So the borderline patients were assumed as less generous, although they were not. But just by watching this video, they were judged as less generous, and they were unfortunately also judged as less trustworthy. And please note that in the video, there was nothing, they didn't talk about trust and they didn't talk about the dictator game. They talked about very simple things, but still somehow they were judged as less generous and as less trustworthy. And how is that? Why is that important for therapy? Of course, because taking over responsibility for others is a very important part of psychotherapy, not only in BPD but also in other personality disorders. Here we can rely on compassion-focused therapy, for example. It's very important to train and to positive social signals, also to signal that somehow to others, and to improve your cooperation and the training of trust and social interaction in everyday life. That plays a very important role in psychotherapy in the classical type of in-person psychotherapy, but also when we go to more to online therapy or to go to just-in-time interventions or ecological momentary interventions. So digitalized psychotherapy, we did that in a little pilots here again in our research training group, where Inga Niedfeld looked at trauma experiences that influences trust and emotion processing. And here, that's how she did it. Again, we gave out smartphones for everyday life. And then there was this judging other persons. Here, there you see a picture of a person, and you are told you give this person €50. What do you think? How much does this person give back to you? Interestingly, that is very dependent on one's trauma. And also on your current mood. So if your mood is very good, then your distrust is low. So you think this person gives you back a lot of money. When your mood is very low, that's up here, in the traumatized patients, you don't trust this person anymore. So trust is dependent on momentary mood, and also the how you perceive other people's mood. Like you see this gentleman here, and you are asked, how is this person feeling at the moment? This depends on your mood in the moment. Not very surprising, but this is very much moderated by trauma. So people with high levels of trauma have this strong dependence of mood ratings and how other people feel depending on their own mood. So this interaction is very much shaped by your trauma experiences than and the mirroring of emotions. That's also the reason why we in neuro studies use this compassion-based ecological momentary interventions developed by my colleague Uli Reininghaus in Mannheim to tackle these issues in everyday life in such an ecological momentary based study. All right, so this now we are in the mid or the heart of psychotherapy, and you will not be surprised then that psychotherapy, and in particular personality psychotherapy, is also moving a little bit towards personality dimensions. There are some statement or some more review papers tackling that, and also DBT has been moving in this direction, dialectical behavioral therapy skills for transdiagnostic emotion dysregulation. So this is DBT beyond borderline and emotion regulation. And there's an interesting meta-analysis on the effects of psychotherapy on personality dimensions. A meta-analysis of more than 200 studies here. And interestingly, um, they looked at what personality factors are mostly influenced by psychotherapy. That's a classical big five personality dimensions, and the most sensitive to psychotherapy success was emotional stability, but also the others were significantly influenced by psychotherapy. So this is psychotherapy, very everything, right? It's 207 studies, and they looked at the intervention type. CBT and supportive psychotherapy types had the highest influence here um, on personality patterns, followed by psychodynamic and pharmacological interventions. So you can influence personality patterns, and this was most present in anxiety and not surprisingly in personality disorder. So this is, of course, nice to see, but the most striking thing is, I guess, that this happens very fast. So this is the effect size of this influencing personality dimensions. And as you can see here, within 8 to 10 weeks, the effect is there. So the what we always thought as hardwired personality patterns can be nicely and quickly influenced. Most strongly, of course, emotional stability when you look at that only, but it's very fast that personality patterns can change. We recently took all this knowledge into account and started um, a, a psychotherapy study on that is based on these mechanisms and is kind of a modular psychotherapy. And we did that in the context of our DZBG, German Center for Mental Health. And we call it MemoPsy, mechanism-based modular psychotherapy. It's for adolescents and young adults with any kind of mental disorder. Aged 15 to 25, they must have at least one mental disorder. So it's completely transdiagnostic. It's beyond the threshold of PTSD. So it's for mild to moderately ill participants. It's an outpatient study, not PTSD is it's the only exclusion actually. But they have to have at least one subscale scored highly on the CTQ severity, so moderate or severe childhood trauma questionnaire severity. So this is modular. That means we have a basis module. Everyone gets it. It's on the integration of aversive childhood experiences. That's a mandatory module. And the other modules are picked depending on the scoring on certain questionnaires. So if you are high in rejection sensitivity or high in emotion regulation, you get this module. You can get 1, 2, or 3 modules. Actually, in this first pilot study, a lot of people get 2 or 3. So we might have to elevate the thresholds in a larger confirmatory trial. So this is an ongoing study. I can't present results yet, but this is well accepted by therapists and also by participants in several places in Germany now. All right. So in the end, to take you on the new journey on that, what we call enhanced psychotherapy, because you can ask so far, so okay, what is neurobiology good for? I mean, you can better understand what changes in the brain, which is nice to see, but does it really change psychotherapy? And I think it can when you combine psychotherapy with other modulators, neuromodulation or um, pharmacological intervention. That's here when you take classical psychotherapy, you can do something called neurofeedback. I will show you in a minute, or you can give drugs and increase the effect of psychotherapy. I can't show you that the combination of drugs and psychotherapy is better because these studies are still awaiting. But what we found is that you can specifically modify the amygdala in the brain with pharmacological agents. So you can tackle this mechanism of emotional dysregulation. And Christian Para did that in a study where he gave citalopram, the SSRI citalopram, single dose during fMRI. So again, the participants saw negative affective phases. So emotions were induced by this, and then the amygdala normally goes up. And then what he tested is then when you give citalopram in the scanner, what happens with the amygdala? Indeed, the amygdala activity it was normalized through the application of citalopram, so only given once. So this is the first hint that we can tackle particular brain regions because other brain regions were not involved here, so a more specific drug effect. So what is a bit further down the road is neuromodulation. So we call it neurofeedback, and that's how it works. So you are lying in scanner. So let's think you're lying in the scanner. You see these pictures in the middle of the screen, and left and right of that, you see this bar moving up and down from red up to down to green. And that's the activity of your amygdala while you lie there, and your task is it to get it down. So you feel emotions by watching at the pictures, your lights up, and then you down it. That sounds very simple, and it is also very simple. It can be done within a few minutes, actually. And Christian Paret again showed that also in borderline personality disorder, the amygdala can be downregulated with neurofeedback. You see here, while watching pictures, the amygdala is higher than while it is regulated. So the amygdala goes down while they lie in the scanner. And even more important is that this regulation leads to a better connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. We see that here in healthies, when within 30 minutes, you see an increase here, that's the white bar, an increase of this connectivity strength. This is very important, not on single individual regions, but how is the connectivity between these regions? So that's quickly increase that connectivity. And in patients here, in patients with BPD, after 4 sessions, 4 times 30 minutes, we see a connectivity strength that is similar to healthy. So after 4 times 30 minutes. We did a larger study here where we also looked at everyday life emotion regulation, so EMA before and after this neurofeedback. What we see that the key factor, the inattention, emotion dysregulation, so the change from 1 hour to the other, you remember this colorful picture, it's markedly reduced after 3 sessions of neurofeedback, and the effect is pertained for 2 weeks. And that's why we now do a larger multi-center trial that's just started, also funded by the DFG, just included the first subjects, and I have to say they really like it. So we have more participants that like to take part in this study than we can serve at the moment, which is of course nice for the study. And it's a 4-center trial at 4 places in Germany. And what we also do or did is actually we try to boost the effects of DBT with a neurofeedback. And this is a recently finalized study where we halfway through DBT, after 6 weeks, we look at the borderline symptom list, and those participants that are still above a threshold get then neurofeedback training. That's why we call it brain boost. We try to boost the effect of DBT with the neurofeedback, and I hopefully have the result in a few weeks, but not now today. But that's just to show you how we can use that knowledge and use, for example, neuromodulation to improve emotion regulation. And hopefully, we can show that this also leads to a better clinical outcome. All right, so I hope I didn't stress you for too long. Now it's 8 o'clock. Okay, and I come to the end. Just a few take-home messages. I hope I took away your fear for ICD-11 that conceptualizes personality disorders primarily in a dimensional way. I think that helps us to broaden our understanding without getting rid of all the good things we know about the neurobiology of BPD. I think it broadens our understanding and helps us to understand and these underlying mechanisms better. Of course, the bulk of knowledge is there for emotional dysregulation and related psychopathology, and I wanted to show you a little bit of an insight into our lab. Self-injury can be understood better um, by this mechanistic research. But of course, the most important point is that we can use it to better understand these mechanisms and to develop new treatments such as neurofeedback. And this mechanism-based and modular psychotherapy approach hopefully opens new possibilities for transdiagnostic and a more individualized treatment. And I don't want to end without thanking again Martin for, of course, mostly for mentoring me for the last decades, I have to say, but also all the people that work together with us. For example, here on the upper left side, that's our clinical research unit, and upper right, that's the young PhD and MD students from our research training group from all over the world. And here, that's my group working together with me and brilliant young researchers that brought together all these findings I just showed you. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah. Thank you, Christian, for this nice overview. Really going back in the 90s and now really looking in the future. So, and actually, I can say this is only a very small part of a selection of the things you're doing. So, friends and colleagues, you are now welcome to discuss. You can ask questions. The point is, questions can be put in the chat on the YouTube channel. This means those of you who are looking on our EDBTA website, you might click on the left of the screen. There you find just a button where you click, and then they lead you to the YouTube channel. And at the YouTube channel, you can ask the questions. Once again, you cannot put anything in the chat on our website, since the website is just mirroring the YouTube channel. If you want to ask questions, and you might, you should click on the button, the black button on the left side of the screen, and then they lead you to the YouTube part. So now I'm going to go to the YouTube part and look whether we have any chats. So actually, normally it takes a while. We have about 50 people watching, and it takes a little bit. Christian, in the meantime, we could just talk a little bit, so till we have questions. So what would you say? What maybe I ask one or two questions, since it's sometimes interesting to learn from failed studies. So I know that you have been investigating the impact of cannabinoid on emotion dysregulation, sleep disorders, and so how far is that study? Did you have results, or do you know anything about the cannabinoid issues?
No, unfortunately we don't have the results yet. This is a multi-center study where we looked at cannabinoids, particularly on PTSD symptoms, also in borderline, but also in PTSD and nightmares. So this is a larger multi-center trial that has just been finalized. It was not so easy to recruit the patients. I wouldn't say it's a failed study, but it was difficult to recruit. I think we also learn a lot from, not of course failing studies, but also non-hypothesis confirming studies, like the ones I
Hmm.
showed on the influence of self versus other inflicted pain. I strongly believe that there's a difference whether you hurt yourself or somebody else does it. But I think you can learn a lot of those studies and build up new research on that. But here, I think there's a first.
Hmm.
There was a
I
question, yeah.
do you also look at the YouTube? Okay,
No, I
so this,
just saw that there was a question, but it's gone.
yeah, yeah. Um, so we have one question. I'm wondering if there are also conceptualizations for high risk behavior in BPD.
Hmm.
So this is
Of
I
course,
just.
there are.
Mhm.
Yeah, there are conceptualizations for high risk behavior, and actually there's the severe behavioral disorder inventory, SBDI. And actually, you mentioned the retreat, Martin. We just talked about that at our retreat last week. Differentiation between self-injury and high risk, some overlap. Also an overlap between psychological factors and also probably the underlying neurobiology. I have to say that high risk behavior is quite well understood, I would say, clinically, and we know what it is. But the basis or the mechanisms and the neurobiology is quite less well understood as compared to aggression or self-injury.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the clinical theory is that it has something to do with sensation seeking. This means that you bring your organism in an objective danger, which activates a lot of aminergic substances, which
Yeah,
drives you, causes some kind of an aminergic flooding, like dopamine flooding and so on. And I would say there's a huge discrepancy between self-harm and high risk behavior. However, what you saw, Christian, you showed that self harm is related to to opioid increase. Huh? That's true. Huh? So
yeah,
you assess the opioid level in the saliva pre and post self harm. Is that true? It was
that's
opioids.
true.
Yeah, yeah.
That was beta endorphins, one of the
Beta
endogenous
endorphins. Yeah,
opioids.
and it can be that this kind of high risk behavior can also have an
Yeah,
influence.
that would be interesting. We haven't done that. That would be a nice study to do that. It's easily to do with the salivates. But of course, and that's also we discussed at the retreat, there's also this emotion regulation aspect of high risk behavior that connects it now to self-injury. It has maybe both sides. So it has the emotion regulation and of course this stimulating dopamine or endogenous opiate related part.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
don't know that. That's what I
yeah,
meant.
yeah.
So we have to study the high risk behavior more.
Whereas it's complicated to do experiments. It's another thing. What you I think there are several components. You have this kind of escape release. No? Whenever you escape a severe danger, you have some severe stress relief which calms you down. No? So this
Mhm.
can play a role in emotion regulation, so that you just have this. I think it's a neurobiological process. Every child knows it. When you play a game and you hide and then then you escape, then you love
Mm.
it. But we have another question.
Yeah.
Thanks for a very interesting lecture, Anna Lindström from Stockholm. Um, is neurofeedback used at all in the psychotherapeutic clinic in Germany, or is it research only?
That's a very good question. In neurofeedback in general is used in psychotherapy and in psychiatry a lot in ADHD, but it's EEG neurofeedback that is used. But recently, research showed that the evidence base is not so good. We use it we are at this threshold between um, research and clinical use. We don't use it yet. We hope that our a larger multi-center trial opens some ways to use it also in routine. But for that, we have to probably go back to EEG, and that's what we also working on. Chris Parrott in my group is working on combining EEG and fMRI to get the neurofeedback back to everyday life, and that because MR is expensive, as you all know. And it's not readily available everywhere. So I think that neurofeedback with an fMRI machine will not be a broad therapeutic approach, but when we manage to get it back to EEG, we might have an opportunity.
But maybe we add something, Christian. What you did is you in your design you had how many sessions you provided or, to your
We
clients
provide 3 or 4. In the new study, we have 4 sessions of neurofeedback,
within
and we
which
look at.
time?
Sorry,
In which
at
time frame?
within 2 weeks, so 2 sessions per week,
Mm-hmm.
and but in the new study we look at long-term effects.
Mm-hmm.
As I showed you, we could show that 3 sessions have 2 weeks effect, which is nice. But now we look at 6 months
Mm-hmm.
effects,
Mm-hmm.
and if we can show that, then you can do some cost calculations. I mean, neuroimaging is expensive, but when you compare it to costs for drug treatment or psychotherapy,
Mm-hmm.
you can now do some cost effectiveness analysis. That's what we will see once we have the results. But I think we have to wait.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then we have our friend Jeremy from South Africa. Yeah, when you're talking
Hello.
about using a scalpel to cause pain and the pain and endorphins, I was wondering about the fact that clients often go for tattooing, which is also painful without harmful effects.
Yeah, very good question. I think that is why we see so many patients with tattoos. And nowadays it has changed because now tattoo is so widespread. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was also some empirical research showing that it's patients with not only BPD but also other mental health conditions have elevated levels of tattoos, and of course that's also pain inflicting in a very controlled way. It
Yeah,
doesn't have it doesn't, of course, you can't directly compare it to self-injury, of course, but it has a way of controlled pain application.
yeah. So I like the question. So it's a little bit like, say, if you feel high levels of aversive arousal, you go to your tattooer. Um, I think it's a very expensive way to do it. Okay, but thank you for that. Any other questions? No. But then it's okay, I think, yeah? So, Christian, um, before we just enter in a dialogue, it's from my side once again to thank you for this, to give us this talk. I know everybody in the whole community, all these speakers do it for free just to support the EDBTA, and I'm more than happy that you have been with us. And
It was a pleasure.
yeah, and I'm sure that a lot of people will watch it. We just hear that really hundreds of people are looking at the YouTube channel later on.
Mhm.
Maybe we just advertise it already. So we figured out that Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening is not the most family friendly um, date. So next year, January, we will remove our channel, our webinar to Wednesday in the evening. I think this is a little bit more appropriate. So Christian, once again, thank you. Have a nice evening.